Hello, everyone. I can't actually see you. The lights are so bright, so I can't make eye contact. I hope you're having a good JPM. I think you have to sit in. Yes.
We're on the science seat.
I believe so. All right. Well, thank you, panel. We've had a great introduction. So we're in the era of TechBio now. A driving force in medical advances, supposedly. Well, I've been writing about medicine for a long time, and we've had a lot of waves of revolution in pharma that I've covered. There's been computational biology, there's been genomics-driven precision medicine, and all of them have had this promise, haven't they, of decoding biology. So I feel like I'm a little kid in the back of the car saying to his parents, are we there yet? So that is my first question for you all. Are we there yet? Have we had the revolution? Are we in the middle of this revolution? Is it different now? Are we going to decode biology? Who wants to go first? Should we start at the end?
Oh, sure.
Thanks, Dean.
The era of computational power with machine learning and AI is going to affect every industry, and so pharma is not going to be outside of that. And within pharma, there are so many different places that I think machine learning, computation will be important. Some of it will be in the area of the business, which is very similar to other businesses, and some of it will be specifically in the places which is unique to pharma, which is trying to make molecules that have unambiguous promotable advantage that address important diseases. And within that, you think of every revolution that's come in: X-ray crystallography, computational biology, combinatorial chemistry, biologics. What I think will be a little bit different for AI and machine learning is it's not going to affect any one of them individually. It's going to affect all of them, and they're going to affect the flow of all of them. And so I think that this age, we're upon it. We're trying to put them in each sort of vertical stack of where they are. But eventually we're going to have to be good at tying them together. And so I would say that we're just at the beginning. But I think this is a real revolution that will impact our industry, all industries, but especially in the science, where we have to knit all different types of sciences together. And each one of those stacks, whether it be molecular biology or chemistry or design of medicines or clinical trials, all of them will be affected to some degree, and all of it will eventually lead to acceleration.
Tony, what about you? Do you see signs that we are indeed arriving at our destination of a big major shift in our ability to decode biology with AI?
So I'm the only probably non-scientist on this panel. I'm a 27-year-old tech investor. So I've spent my entire career investing here in Silicon Valley, and so my perspective might be a little bit different than Alex and Dean here. Maybe Kimberly and I are maybe more aligned. So I think you asked, is it here? I'd say not quite yet. I mean, I would say, yeah, no, but but there are promising signs. So let me give you my perspective to answer your question. Is tech investors they look at this as a vertical industry. And generally, we're more interested in investing in horizontal platforms. So computational platforms, software platforms, database platforms, various platforms that are horizontal, which then you apply these horizontal technologies and platforms to vertical industries. And so for my entire career, these horizontal technology platforms and breakthroughs have been applied to literally every industry, with the exception of healthcare.
Right.
So some progress, and then Gen AI comes, and it's yet another one of these horizontal platforms, a computational platform, but it has, as Dean alluded to, has obviously superpowers that potentially could be applied and finally crack the Rubik's Cube of this vertical industry that has been so resistant to these horizontal technological changes. And I do see signs of that.
Such as?
Well, I think what the Google guys have done with the protein folding and AlphaFold, and now you're just seeing all these new foundation models that are not just language, but I think NVIDIA and Jensen would coin it's the world model, right? These new foundation models that are learning, the sciences and math, physics, and biology and chemistry, and not just language. And then that capability and these stacks of technology, can it then be unlock this vertical industry, which is, historically as an investor, as a tech investor, you've been perpetually disappointed that why is this industry so resistant to adopting these technologies?
Kimberly, do you want to just jump in?
I would love to. I don't think this industry is resistant to adopting technologies. I do think it has aggressive behavior. I would agree with Jensen's sentiment last year. He said this industry uses a lot of aggressive behavior. Aggressive language in the way that it describes the work that it does. I don't think it's resistant at all to technology. In fact, here's my impression of what's going on. Large language models for natural language we've been on about a good 5-year journey of it. In this 5-year journey, we're now existing in a 3 scaling law journey of it, which has created the conditions for it to be an amazing companion to every single one of us. I think we could agree we're using it on a very regular basis. One scaling law is the pre-training scaling law. And in that scaling law, you have to have enough data in order to allow for the machine to learn. And in fact, I think we could all attest, I am no scientist, but I believe that if we want to scale science, we need to use machine learning. And if you want to do machine learning, you need machines. But that pre-training is the first scaling law that gave us GPT in the first place. It opened everybody's mind to the possibility. There's 2 more scaling laws that have now quickly followed. One of those is called post-training scaling. And this is where you introduce perhaps synthetic data in order to look for corner cases that maybe the world has not seen before. And we need to do that for biology for sure. And then the third scaling law is what's called test time scaling. And this is essentially, a fancy way of talking about the reasoning and train of thought behavior that O1 and what OpenAI has created in these amazing new thinking models. And so I would say that no, we're not there yet, but we are on this journey in earnest. We are in the pre-training era for biology. But I think everybody in this room and Chris and the team at Recursion have absolutely been on this quest for a long time with the intuition that says we now have the technology both in the wet lab and the dry lab to start being able to represent the world of drugs and the world of biology in a computer. And we need to do that first so that we can move on to this much deeper understanding that will be made possible through this post-training where we can, through molecular dynamics and physics-based methods, be able to introduce more data into the system that's physically grounded. We can then use agents to assist our scientists in deep scientific thinking and be along the process and be able to instantaneously search any piece of literature that's ever been written. And so we're just starting to see this transpire, and the foundation models, as you described, are coming out of the woodwork. And I just think we're a few years behind.
Your vision of the future sounds very resource intensive in terms of computing power. It's interesting.
What are you going to do with all the data everybody's making? Just let it sit there in a database like it's doing right now?
Alex, last but not least.
Well, just first of all, I want to say how great it is to be here at JP Morgan and, look out in this room at people who kind of pour their heart and soul every day into, I think, one of the greatest, bioscientific ecosystems in the world. And I don't know about all of you, but, as you get through the holidays, sometimes I go, I got to go out to JP Morgan. And you think, it's going to be, all the meetings and all the stuff you do. And then every time I get towards the end and I go back and I go, what an incredible experience. Because not only do you get to see the great science, the new ways of thinking, but as important, when you just walk around the halls here and you reconnect with colleagues that you grew up with in the industry, we realize what a special place we have to be able to work in a place that really helps patients around the world. And all of you are a part of that. And so thank you for doing what you do. I think it's important that, especially in today's environment, that you hear that and for all of us to stay focused on the mission. But, to the question, and, somebody has spent probably about 3.5 decades, in this area, there's always this tug of war, I think, about new technologies. And on one hand, there's a desire to, how do you embrace them? How do you bring them to work faster? How do you make sure that we're not too dogmatic, too bureaucratic in our organizations to adopt these, especially in some of the larger organizations, so that we can actually bring, new transformations to patients faster? At the same time, there's an offset. How do we do that in a way that minimizes risk, that maximizes the benefit, and that ensures ultimately that we do good, we don't do harm. And as someone who's seen a lot of technologies come and go, high throughput screening, combinatorial chemistry, and others, that I think many would say, did it really make as big of a difference immediately after they were implemented? Probably not. But my experience also has kind of inform me that we tend to underpredict the initial challenge associated with the adoption, but then what happens is there's a turning point where suddenly they take off, and then we underestimate the transformational impact that they can have. And in this case, I'm definitely someone who would be leaning in. I think there's extraordinary promise, to Dean's earlier comment, across almost every domain that we touch. And if anything, I would kind of implore everybody in this room to think about this, not just as, is this going to be an impact on drug discovery, drug development, but how does it impact our entire system of the way we look at bringing therapeutics to market? Because one will implicate the other. And if we don't think about, as we're selecting new sites, as we're designing new molecules, what impact that's going to have on our ability to actually create, manufacture, and supply these. As we think about creating new drugs for perhaps more specific patient populations, what's the commercial model going to be? And how can we utilize some of these same tools to ensure that we can get access in a way that is commensurate with our overall goals? So, and then last but not least, I think that there's a significant issue about building these capabilities in our organizations, so that it's not just, we have traditional scientists here and the technologists here, but how do we embed those skills literally in everything that we do across all the different domains that it takes to actually, get something from the lab ultimately to a patient. So just a couple of reflections.
Alex and Dean, I'm interested in your perspective of sort of like how long it's going to take before we're going to see real results from this kind of, what seems to be a step change in drug discovery and the process. I mean, we hear about it all the time. There's not a lot of practical results we can point to and say, this drug on the market was developed with AI. How long is it going to take before we're really confident that this is making a big difference?
Well, I would frame the way that we think about it maybe a little bit different, at least the way that I come at it. there isn't going to be a molecule that says, this is TechBio and was not biotech. What is going to happen is what's happening at Merck, at J&J, at all of these companies, the way that people model their small molecule chemistry. If your workforce doesn't know how to do computational use of structure, you're not going to get any molecules going through. So to me, it isn't that you're going to have a TechBio machine learning AI molecule. It's going to be embedded in a much more, I think in terms of steak, like the fat is going to be, it's not fat, the flavor is going to be embedded throughout. How's that? So that's how I think about it. It isn't like there's a separate TechBio versus biotech. Both are going to need each other, and they're going to be blended in different ways in different domains. And so getting to Tony's sort of thing, I don't know that there's a smooth horizontal platform, but for each domain, it may be different places in how it's done. But I can just tell you, if you're going to talk about computation using machine learning AI, I would go to most composition of matter teams in most major pharma, and they're using it already.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree. You talked about de-risking, and I just think there's this interesting paradigm we're seeing very rapidly happen, which is instead of, in the design, make, test, analyze, where you're making and then you're analyzing, we're going to analyze first and then we're going to make. And the ability to use generative models to generate ideas maybe way outside of scientists' experience or intuition, use the amazing predictive power of the models, use multimodal to be able to optimize and really understand the interactions, and then go into the wet lab. And then, of course, take every little piece of data coming out of that wet lab and put it back into the models. This is the shift. And so to your point, I don't think you're going to point to one molecule that said that's a TechBio thing. It's a process change. It's a complete flip-flop of how it's been done for the last century or centuries.
So what do we think about this term TechBio then? If it's everywhere, if tech is everywhere in bio, why are we calling it TechBio? Why don't we just call it bio?
I just heard that. I heard that for the first time today.
Coming from a tech company, I enjoy the term very much. I enjoy it very much, and one of the things I would also say about this, and it's another theme NVIDIA's really enabling, which is physical AI. The TechBio part for me is there's a platform involved. I just talked about, we used to think of the platforms as being the instruments in which you're utilizing inside of the wet lab. There's a digital version of that. We need to take this wet lab and bring it into a dry lab. We need to take this physical world and bring it into the digital world. And so that part for me, and platforms that allow for that to happen and create a repeatable process and make it more of a design problem versus a discovery problem, that's why I love the tech part of it.
I might take a slightly different bent in that, and we were talking outside before we came in, I think at some point I don't think you need to necessarily even have the word tech, because it's going to be part of doing everything that we do. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we're going to face as an industry is how do we ensure that we're educating, that we're training, that we're developing people with all the right capabilities, particularly as we go through this transformation, because it won't happen just overnight. And so instead of saying, well, the technologists are over there, yet the clinicians, the more traditional developers are over here. I think the faster that we can get to a common language, and frankly not be so differentiated, I think just the more ubiquitous and commonplace and impactful it'll become.
I mean, do you see like a sort of culture clash between the sort of technology side of this and the biology side? I mean, and what does that look like? I mean, what does that mean in practice for how this...
Oh, I think we definitely saw that early on. In fact, Jennifer, what was it, about 2 years ago, we had a chance to attend a dinner one night where we very intentionally tried to bring together a lot of incredibly impactful, seasoned pharmaceutical drug discoverers and drug developers. I mean, people, frankly, whose name could be found on the publications leading to some of the largest compounds in our history. And we also had some people who we all read about every day as it relates to AI. And it was a really interesting conversation. Granted, it was 2 years ago, but there was one side that was obviously quite bullish on the impact that this technology could have, and that these new models and how they could translate, much of what we deal with daily on a scientific basis vis-a-vis these new tools. And we went back and forth, and I'll never forget one of the quotes from one of the, let's call it the traditionalists, was, "That sounds really great, but whenever you combine chemistry, physics, and biology, strange stuff happens." and there was almost this little talking above each other. On one hand, of you don't understand the power of these tools and the transformational impact that they could have, and on the other one is, but you don't understand the clinical, the regulatory, and the underlying scientific complexity. And I think by the end of the conversation, there was a much better understanding. But I'm sure those kind of conversations take place more than just in that room. I think it's improving, particularly as the tools are brought to bear and people get a chance to see these things actually being implemented. But I wouldn't underestimate the challenge of, again, making sure we collectively as an industry, as an ecosystem have, as we get these things implemented.
Does anyone else want to jump in on culture clash? Otherwise, I'll move.
Yeah, I have multiple friends and family in biotech, and you see the melting of the ice a little bit, the rigidity, like, well, that will never work. That it's throwing an AI model, outspits a wonder drug. Huge amount of skepticism, but this year a little less so. Maybe next year it'll be a little less so. And I think Alex would probably attest that going forward, this will be a tool that will be a universal. You can't probably do drug discovery without it. I would also say something, this culture clash is also, it is evident in the capital markets. Okay. So I'm here, my colleague is probably doing 100 meetings. She runs life sciences at BlackRock. And, for many years, for the last, 7 or 8 years, I've looked at a number of companies that were this, what would you call TechBio, right? This is kind of computational biology, or AI with this or AI with that, Recursions, Excentia, the Schrodingers, a number of companies that I've looked throughout over the years. And there is skepticism from the biologists, like, well, they look at it in the context of biotech and drug discovery. And the tech investors look at it, they say, I have no idea what you're talking about. And there's just way too much risk. And I don't want to underwrite that kind of uncertainty. They are like, well, just build technology platforms, build these horizontal platforms. And therein lies the tension. And so, my inclination, my proclivity is why don't you just build horizontal platforms? Why isn't there a Cadence and Synopsys and an EDA simulation software platform for biology and chemistry? And why don't we have these kinds of foundational platforms in the healthcare industry? And maybe that's starting to change now, right?
Well, why don't we?
Well, I think a lot of them, this is my observation, and Alex, Dean, you should jump in, that they themselves are wanting to build drugs. And there is not enough money to build just a software platform, right? you can build small subscale, and you're selling to the same 20, 30 pharma companies. It's hard to scale that. And so what do? If you're a public company or whatever, you need to scale. And so what is the path of least resistance in their eyes is, well, let's bet on 13 Black and get the next big drug. But, then that comes with a multi-billion-dollar cost and pipeline versus why don't we just build a horizontal software platform to imagine if there was a cadence of a biology, a simulation, but it's so hard to scale that. And so therein lies this tension. Like the tech guys want this less risk. They don't understand the X target molecule going through all this clinical trial process. They don't want anything to do with it. And then the healthcare people, until recently, have just been very skeptical of applying AI and outspit some drugs. And so this is starting to come together, but I think this is the kind of the culture clash mindset. It's also pretty still apparent in the financial industry.
Well, what about Merck? I mean, I remember going to see you like about 10 years ago more, and I asked about digital apps and technology, and I was told, we make drugs. So presumably...
We make drugs. I just want to step back, and my good looks belie my age. But there was a time that molecular biology and genetics came into developmental biology. And there was that classic developmental biology. I'm going to take this thing, I'm going to move it here and this, and not sort of a genetic molecular biology. And there was enormous cultural clashes in different departments. One said, oh, well, you're just taking one gene and thus you're not truly understanding the complexity and all of this. And it's turned out that the two fields have melded together. And the reason I say that is the culture clash comes from the fact that the extreme position on both, and maybe we're talking about extreme positions right before an inauguration. However, having said that, you have this one group that says, well, TechBio, I have all the data I want. And all I'm going to do is take a magic wand called machine learning and AI. I no longer have to do any experiments, and out pops a drug. If that's your definition of TechBio, it ain't happening, and I doubt it will happen. This concept of you have to, what TechBio does is allows you to take, coordinated large sets of data to make conclusions that leads to hypotheses that then need to be retested. So that's that one extreme. The other extreme is, we have all this data. We've been in the business for 100 years, 130 years. We know what we're doing. We don't need you. And then when you talk to your bosses in this, you remind them that the data that's most important for your large pharmaceutical company that helps you make drugs is not the 130 years of data. It's the last 5-10 years of data because the exponential growth of the data is so much. And you have these very tough conversations to say, if you're relying on 130 years, you have to understand the exponential types of data that's happening. These quote unquote tech bio companies, if they do it right, they can capture that data in a different way for the next 5-10 years. So we need to be careful. So there's a culture because of the extreme. And that's why I like to think about ribeye steaks and how the flavor has to be throughout. And so I sit there, I go, that technology, no different than molecular biology, but machine learning AI is even a broader technology. But if what we're looking for is a central horizontal platform of how it's going to affect each one of these verticals, I think we're going to be disappointed. They're going to affect the different verticals in different ways. And what we're going to have to be smart about is blending it. But I will just emphasize, when I speak to people who spend 20 years making a drug, the thing that irritates them most is that somehow you're going to take all the data that you had and it's going to pop out a drug without you ever doing an experiment. That's what gets people who are who are sort of in pharmaceutical companies for 30 years, aneurysm starts blowing up.
That's always hard to follow, Dean.
Okay, sorry.
Look, I think another aspect that I think about, though, is what a change that's occurred just over even the last few years. I mean, who would have thought 10 years ago, if we would have been in the same tent, that you would have a technology company, somebody who covers it from the financial side and the tech side, most likely would have been 4 heads of R&D from pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
And when you think about how ubiquitous technology now is, and look, I'm incredibly fortunate to sit on the board of a couple of great tech companies, and whether it's Apple, whether it's IBM, but whether it's NVIDIA, whether it's companies like Amazon, and go on, what are one of their top priorities? Healthcare. And how do we embed those tools? And it's not as though we couldn't use the help. And so I think what an exciting time to see this convergence between healthcare and tech, all focused in these kind of areas. And it certainly gives me great hope that the kind of transformation and advancement that we're going to see is likely going to go even faster. One other item, though, that I think is worth mentioning as we talk about a lot of these tools, and Kimberly, I think you got to this as well, is while there is the technology piece, underlying all of that is also data. And for decades, so many of us in the pharmaceutical industry, I mean, data has been kind of our capital, you might say. And in some ways, we're chemical companies, but in most ways, we take chemicals and we characterize it by data, and the data is the secret sauce. And as we go forward, thinking maybe differently about how we share, combine, pull together different data sets that ultimately help enable and fuel some of these tools in ways that are going to lead to even greater breakthroughs, I think will be an interesting challenge and something we should certainly think about because it could, in my mind, unlock great potential if done in the right way.
I'll make an optimistic statement. So I've been obviously living this AI for the last 2 years, and for pretty much all other industries, the predominant driver, the drumbeat of AI right now, obviously beyond all these scaling laws that we're entering, these test time compute scaling, et cetera, is around, at the end of the day, it's around efficiency, productivity and efficiency for corporate America, for consumers, et cetera. And you can read into what that will, but a lot of it is driven by efficiency gains. However, in life sciences, I look at that, and I think with Jensen's talking about the physical world, the world models, this AI, and this offers something not just about efficiency. This offers an industry potential, a breakthrough of net new, not just cost efficiency or cost takeout. And therein lies a huge potential promise. In a way, that's why I'm even here. This is of interest to me because it is beyond just cost efficiency and labor arbitraging, silicon for which a lot of the focus right now on with AI is, but in industries like this, it is potential offers the scepter of the beyond the efficiency argument.
I did want to make a comment. I love what you said. So if you look at a pharmaceutical company, there are things that are really focused on what makes a molecule in a medicine. But there's a lot of the business of a pharmaceutical company that's not that different than other businesses. So you can use machine learning AI on text, right? That's structured data in this. And you sit there and you go, our regulatory interactions are as structured as you can, almost. And it's filled with hundreds of people writing, not my words, lifeless prose. Does that make sense? That is one of efficiency. But you look at the concept of how do you make a molecule in structural biology. When I was in high school and in college, there was, and I actually think you might have overlapped, there was a family that we knew, and it was Paul Sigler's family. Structural biology took so long to crystallize. It almost was like after the fact you would explain things. Now, all of a sudden, with cryo-EM and all of that, you can get the structure at the very beginning of what you're trying to do. So I just, and in that situation, it's not about efficiency in the same word. There, it's making the impossible maybe just become improbable. That's that sort of technology. And so when you think about that, there's two places. There's one where there's efficiency, and then there's the other place where you're trying to make the impossible improbable, and maybe the improbable maybe scalable.
But you're
And
talking
that's
about
where that is
creativity.
coming.
That's what you're talking about.
I'm sorry?
You're talking about creativity.
Yeah, I just saw. I mean, you guys. I saw in the press the Colossus are trying to recreate bring back the woolly mammoth. They just raised it a $10 billion valuation. That's making the impossible possible. I mean, it's inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting to think about the fact that we can digitize biology that is way beyond human comprehension has to lend itself to be able to build this and model it in a computer and deepen our understanding. And it's not about productivity; it's about emergent behavior of these models. And there's a huge theme going on right now around virtual cells. I think we've built the digitalization platforms of biology in a way we're going to make our way to the digital cell. That is an absolute unlock that is otherwise not capable.
So we haven't got much longer, and I had two kind of big questions or big areas I wanted to touch on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the two questions, and I'm going to let you finish, make a closing remark, and you can either answer one of those two questions or you could ignore it entirely and close your own way. Okay? I'll mix and match. So one question I had was, given that we're at the sort of beginning of this, long wave of innovation, how do you invest well in the technologies, the AI technologies? What do you look for? And then the other question was, well, are there any potential unintended consequences of relying too much on machines for doing drug discovery? Are we going to lose skills? So those are my two kind of questions. I will start with Alex, actually. I'll start with you, and you have the choice of either answering one of those two questions or ignoring them and just saying something futuristic and optimistic.
I think as we consider both those questions, that we need to remember two of the fundamental drivers why all of us are here and why we do what we do. And one is ultimately, what is it going to do to help patients?
Right.
And it can be easy to get caught up into science experiments. It can be easy to get caught up into applications that ultimately may not be differentiated. Or in reality, more effective or safer than what's currently available, and keeping that in mind. And number two, the question about value, and what value are we actually providing? What value are we creating? Because ultimately, if we don't do that, the machine can't keep going. So I think just keeping those two things in mind as we consider those questions and the application of this technology going forward in our really special industry.
Kimberly?
I think that we're in the age of being able to create digital intelligence. And just like every other revolution humanity has lived through in the past, it has advanced humans. I believe it will advance science in incredible ways. And it is a tool. Technology is a tool. It is codifying what we can now build through robotic automation in labs data sets that are far beyond human comprehension, but build them into digital intelligence that can accelerate our scientific thinking and our creative thinking. It can model things that are so complex, but do it in real time. In fact, 1 million times faster by way of computing, that the scientific and creativity can move that much faster in the quest for being able to find these medicines. It can take a lot of the waste out of the really, really important part of clinical development that unfortunately we live through today. And you're going to see it not only in the early discovery in sciences, but as you say, all the benefit that we're going to get in clinical development, and then of course being able to educate patients and clinicians so that these medicines can find the patient. So it's not just in early discovery. It's an amazing what we're going to do for science there, but it's going to be applied throughout. And I think there's absolutely no downside to that.
Tony.
I'm a broken record. I would love to see a few amazing kick-ass horizontal platforms.
I think he's asking me to pivot our strategy at NVIDIA.
That emerge in this industry, whether it is in drug discovery, whether it's in preclinical, whether it's in clinical trial, whether it's in test, whether it's in wet lab. There could be multiple platforms that emerge. Unless I go back to school and become a molecular biologist, I'm not going to be betting, unless I work very close with our biotech colleagues and we come to conclusions of those vertical solution companies. My interest and the tech investor, I don't know about TechBio, but the tech person favors horizontal platforms.
Yeah, so I would just say from an investment standpoint, what I would look is there's two challenges. In a pharmaceutical company, you have all of these domains and verticals, and it's all connected to potentially from an idea all the way to make a drug, to test it, and to get it out to the people. And the challenge for us is where to invest in computation, machine learning, AI, because if you try to invest a bit broadly, you're going to get nothing done. You have to aim small, miss small, rinse and repeat. And you have to decide which of the domains that you're going to do. But the advantage of a pharmaceutical company is that we have those different domains and know how to connect it. The TechBio they're often a very, very small subset within a domain, and they're second to none. And they are far more efficient in that domain. But they're going to have the inefficiency of building out all the other capabilities. And so pharma has a problem of building in, and in my mind, quote unquote, the tech bios are having the inefficiency of building out. So I think within the tech bio and the pharma business, there will be merging, and within tech bio, it'll be very important that they begin to coalesce amongst them, right? If you want to be an imaging company and it's based on cellular imaging, let me just tell you, cellular imaging by itself will not get me a molecule. It's combining cellular imaging with molecular imaging that might get me a molecule. So both of us have an inefficiency, but if both of us think the other one's going away, we're in for a surprise.
Well, look, I just want to say to the panel, thank you for being just such a dream to work with. I barely had to do any work. I just poked you a little bit and then you were off. And what an entertaining panel. So could you please put your hands together and thank them? All right.